So, welcome to Miami-Dade College Wolfson Campus's workshop on writing a research paper in your own words. My name is Renee Ferrer, and I am a writing tutor here at Wolfson Campus. And we're going to go over this with you. So, give me a moment. I'm just monitoring arrivals. So, first, understanding the assignment. When you're given a research paper assignment, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're clear on the expectations, requirements for that assignment. So first, read the assignment instructions carefully and clarify with your professor any doubts. This seems self-evident, but I've been a teacher for several years, both in public school as well as a college professor. And I've found that very often, uh, one of the first mistakes students make is misunderstanding the assignment expectations from the start, misreading the instructions and heading off in a direction which is not where they're supposed to be. As a matter of fact, it's something which, as a graduate student, happened to me. I misunderstood a presentation assignment I was given, which was due 2 months later. I did something completely different than what I was supposed to do. I showed up the day of with a presentation, which was not supposed to be what I was presenting, and it turned out to be the most humiliating experience of my college career. So make sure to read those assignment instructions carefully. And if you have any questions, ask your professor for clarification. Identify when the assignment is due, its length specifications, word limit, and its goal. Make sure you can build realistic timeline of what you need to do, how to fit it into your schedule. Make a bulleted list of key points and cross off completed items. Give yourself that sense of accomplishment, that sense of advancement that you're moving step by step. Next, make an appointment with a writing tutor in advance. Um, never hurts. It only helps to have a second pair of eyes look at a writing project, a major research project that you have to work on. And finally, check out the rubric. The rubric will oftentimes tell you all the things, all the elements which your professor is expecting to see in your final product. And what will often happen is that a student who's missing individual elements of the rubric will find themselves far worse than they would be is if they just did not do as well of a job on that particular element as they could have. For example, as I mentioned before, I've been worked as a college professor, and my rubric was broken down. I broke my rubric down into several elements, and what would often happen is each element would have its own weight, its own points values. And if a student was missing that element entirely, that would be a 0 for that. So if that element of the rubric was worth 5%, 10%, that will be 5% or 10% right off the top, which can have a negative, very serious negative impact on your final grade. For those of you who've come in, please make sure to put your student ID number in the chat for the purposes of attendance. So continuing on, make your topic easier by narrowing it. For example, let's say you have a topic on obesity. That's a very broad topic. There's a lot you could say about that. One way to narrow it down would be to say, what are some of the causes of obesity in childhood? Wider topic might be terrorism. Again, very broad topic. A narrower topic would be, how was Bush's Patriot Act justified? Then there's climate change. Again, very broad, but narrowing it down, you could say something like, which economic class will suffer most from climate change? And again, space travel, very broad topic, but which can be narrowed down to How does long-term lack of gravity affect astronauts' bodies and how will that affect future travels to Mars? Um, when you're engaged in a research project, it's very important that you attempt to narrow it down. You don't want to be tackling this great big wide topic, which will it'll overwhelm you very quickly. So what you need to do is narrow it down to something more manageable. Because even you're currently students at Miami-Dade College, whatever research paper you're working on will not be that large. It won't be 20, 30 pages. It won't be the size of a master's thesis or a doctoral degree. Uh, and so what you want to do is, even in those cases, these topics are still very large. Even in those cases, you want to narrow it down. So if even in a situation where you're writing 100-page thesis, uh, there's a risk of going too wide in your topic. Then for whatever classes you're taking, whatever research projects you're working on, the risk of going too wide with your topic is even greater. So you want to make sure to narrow it down so that you have that focus and you don't feel overwhelmed by what you're working on. Continuing on. You want to conduct research on your topic. One of the best things to do is at the start is conduct research first before you've done any writing. See what's being said about the topic. But to do that, you need to know what your acceptable research sources are. Again, I've taught college. I've seen situations where students were unclear, unaware of what made for an acceptable research source. For example, I once had a student who cited, while writing an essay on Beowulf, cited an article which they found online. They found through a Google search. But as it turns out, when you check the source, the article came from a website called Medieval Times, which, if anybody's familiar with it, it's like a holiday resort near Orlando, where you watch fake knights engage in fake jousts, and, and you watch that while you're eating hot dogs and drinking Coke. So that was not a credible source, right? It's some kind of amusement park, resort, uh, just some kind of like Disney style park. It wasn't a serious source. Likewise, later on, another student wrote an essay on Romeo and Juliet and cited something which, again, they found through Google. And it turns out this source they cited was copy written for an item of jewelry at Zales.com, which is a jewelry store. So you want to make sure that when you conduct research, you use credible, acceptable research sources. Google.com is not a good way to find these sources because, as those students discovered, they ended up using source from a theme park and a source from a jewelry store. So what you want to use is things like MDC LibGuides, which you can access through the MDC libraries. You can search by your subject, by a type, by what kind of source you want. You want to stick to things like journal sources. You also want to rely on websites that end in .gov or .org or Google Scholar, .edu, that sort of thing, where you'll find credible sources like researched articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, and so on. For those of you coming in late, please make sure to put your student ID number in the chat for attendance purposes. Thank you. Continuing on. Once you've conducted your research, you've gathered evidence, you've sort of organized your thoughts and what kind of argument you want to be making, you might want to create an outline. And you want to start with what the prompt is asking. So create a list of questions from the prompt. What kind of questions does a prompt raise? And then as you're working on your research essay, address each of those questions while you're writing. So for example, let's say your prompt was, what are some of the theories on why the dinosaurs died off? You might start talking about the asteroid, the Yucatan crater, and start asking questions. What effect did the asteroid have on the atmosphere, the ocean, the land, the air? Um, what effect did it have? Did volcanic activity have all over the world? What did it have? What effect did it have on the air, toxicity? What effect did that have on plant life and water? How about behavior? Um, what were the stressors like causing sudden change in natural animal behavior? What changes were there in predator-prey behavior patterns? What changes were there in migratory patterns? As you ask these questions, it'll open up avenues for research, which you can then answer in your research paper. I would also suggest to create an outline according to the prompt. So let's say your prompt was, what are the causes of childhood obesity? This will be a good opportunity to break down your argument in the order in which you might want to organize it in your essay. So if you were answering this, the first topic we might want to tackle, which we might use for paragraph one, will be parents' low income and wages. And then from there, you get more specific arguments, more specific avenues of research, like fast food being cheap and affordable, or a local example. The average yearly income of residents of Hialeah is $27,000. Families living in poverty due to low wages. All these things can cause childhood obesity. No, thank you, Anga. Have a good night. Another avenue of research that you can pursue in response to this prompt is the effect that school has on children. School demands students sit down for too many hours a day, typically 8 hours. They assign too much homework, which demands more sitting at home. Then another avenue might be school lunches, unhealthy school lunches, low funding for school lunches. What effect do state and national politics have on that? So here's some other ways that you can map out, kind of like organize your thoughts for your arguments. Over here, we have our research commentary, we have our research paper graphic organizers, and so on. These are great ways to organize your thoughts, kind of like think about which direction your research is going, where your argument is going. Then you might want to create an introduction and a conclusion. So let the reader know what they can expect from your paper. The introduction is how that reader knows what to expect from your paper, what it's about, why is it important. Your thesis statement includes your specific topic, the main points about the topic, and the points of discussion. The thesis statement is essentially an outline in the form of one or two sentences, which lets the reader know how your essay should be unfolding. By reading your thesis statement, I should know exactly what arguments you're going to be making throughout the essay. Finally, you end it with your conclusion. Begin with a rephrased thesis statement. Summarize your main points discussed in the paper and tie it all together. Now, I would say when you get to the conclusion and you rephrase your thesis statement, compare it to what you wrote in your essay and then compare it to your original thesis statement. Because what will happen is oftentimes students will start a thesis statement, then they'll work on the research paper. And as they work on it, their ideas develop, their arguments sharpen, but the argument changes. And so by the time they finally finish writing that research paper, it no longer matches the thesis they started with. So when they get to their conclusion and they quote unquote rephrase the thesis statement, what actually happens is they write the real thesis statement and they put it into the conclusion. So I would suggest if you find yourself with a thesis statement which doesn't match the rephrased thesis statement, the conclusion, think about what you wrote. Maybe what happened was that your argument changed as you wrote that essay, and now your original thesis no longer applies and you need to rewrite that. So, creating an introduction. Here's an example. Cockroaches are an integral part of nature. Cockroaches feed upon decaying organic matter, leaf litter, and wood around it. This material traps a lot of atmospheric nitrogen in them, and when cockroaches feed upon them, they release the trapped nitrogen into the soil through their feces. Plants and trees then take in that nitrogen and helps them grow. This essay will help explain the importance of cockroaches in the natural world and their assistance in the fight against climate change by playing a role in the nitrogen cycle, recycling nutrients and serving as a food source for other animals. So, drafts. It all starts pretty ugly. There is no such thing as a perfect first draft. Good writing isn't from the first draft. Good writing comes from the process of revision. And when you're writing, you also want to make sure you avoid plagiarism. So how do you avoid plagiarism? First thing I would say is color code your essay at first, so you know where your information is from. Then you can later properly cite it. So for example, here's a student using evidence they got from a source. The Green and Rourke studies have shown that cities with an educated populace follows more democratic values, has lower incidence of corruption over a period of 50 years. During the Johnson studies, educated citizens had an easier time sifting factual news from fake news when presented with a collection of data in written and visual form. Now, as we can see here, the source, the evidence which came from science.org was highlighted in blue, while the evidence which came from Reuters was highlighted in green. The first draft can be informally written again. Don't expect perfection in the beginning. Good writing comes from revision. But when you use citations, we use evidence, whether it's paraphrasing, quoting, use it sparingly. At the end of the day, a research paper should be your voice and your arguments. And the evidence is there to support you. It's not to replace your voice. Now, paraphrasing is somewhere where you need to be careful. Paraphrasing incorrectly is an easy way of accidentally committing academic dishonesty or plagiarism. For example, here's an example of paraphrasing. Any lunar influence on our health has long been dismissed as unscientific. But new evidence means it may be time to reevaluate the moon's subtle effects on our sleep and mental health. Or rather, here's a quote. Here's a bad way of paraphrasing. Any moon influence on health has forever been dismissed as not science, yet new information means it may be time to evaluate against the moon effects on sleep and mental health. So as you can see, this student just basically took a quote, took off the quote marks, changed a couple words, and that was it. That's not a good way to paraphrase. So here we have a passage, and I would like to see what you guys think. The original passage is, monitoring sewage for the coronavirus's genetic material could give public health experts up to a week of warning before COVID-19 cases peak in an area. Which of the following three options do you think is the best paraphrase for that quote? If one wanted to avoid accidentally engaging in plagiarism. Just take a couple moments, think about it, and put your answer in the chat. Okay, we have Danica saying option B. Anybody else? Okay, Florence says option A. Anybody else? Michelle? Okay. Let's go ahead and go again. Here's our option and oops, sorry. All right. So cutting down on tropical deforestation, decreasing wildlife trade are an expensive way to prevent pandemics. All right. Write a phrase or sentence type of this paragraph. This will be a little bit time consuming, so we're gonna go skip this. Um, so if you need assistance with any kind of AP, MLA formatting, good resources. You want to look up AP 7th edition. Explains how to do cover pages, in-text citations, references, or MLA 9th edition. Again, shows you how to do cover page, in-text citations, or works cited page. And final suggestions, proofread your work, make an appointment with a writing tutor. Uh, you can go or you click this link to book a tutoring appointment. So does anybody have any questions about this presentation? Well, once again, my name is Renee Ferrer. I'm a writing tutor here with Learning Resources at Wolfson Campus. If you have any questions, my email address is rferrer1@mdc.edu. Um, thank you for attending this presentation, and hope you have a wonderful and prosperous semester.